with that said, let's talk about our agenda, what we're going to be talking about today. Now, we only have an hour, which sounds like a lot, but believe me, I can talk a lot. So we're going to be covering just a very basic look at what is Macola ES, how it differs from progression, what it can and can't do, what are the prerequisites for getting to Macola ES, and we'll be talking about those in terms of your hardware environment, your software environment, what are now the different server client requirements for Macola ES. I will tell you that Macola ES is what's called a fat client. In progression, you have a lot of the processing for the progression software running on the server. So you really didn't need really robust workstations. That has changed with Macola ES. And Macola ES pulls a lot more of that processing from the server down to the workstations. So when you review the new hardware requirements for Macola ES, don't be surprised if you see more robust requirements on the workstation side. We will also be talking a little bit about some data prerequisites, things that need to happen in progression for that database to successfully convert to Macola ES. We will talk about the options for upgrading. There are a number of different methods that you can use to upgrade your progression data to Macola ES. We have found that one is by far and away the most popular, but we'll let you decide. We'll talk about what are the ramifications of each of those methods, what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. What's involved in an upgrade project? How do we proceed? We have a standard and, I will say, fairly rigid methodology that we follow and we ask that you follow with us to make this project a success. And we'll go through each of those steps. And probably the most important question that we get is, how much is this going to cost me? Well, that one's going to be an it depends. And we'll look at what the cost elements are. And I have pulled together some information from some case studies that I've done on the different clients that we've worked with on Macola ES upgrades to kind of give you a feel for, what a big user, lots of modules, lots of users, lots of data looks like versus maybe a smaller installation. So first off, what is Macola ES? Just a very brief history of how Macola ES came to be. About 10 years ago, maybe even longer, Macola Software Company in Marion, Ohio, was purchased by Exact Software out of the Netherlands. And what they brought to the table was a product that they had in Europe called Globe. And what they did with the product that they purchased with Macola, which is progression, is they took what they considered the best parts of both of those products. They replaced the progression accounting with the Globe accounting function. And you'll see that is the vast difference in Macola ES to progression. And then they took pretty much everything south of accounting and kept it in the progression functionality. Now, the screen sets, the databases, those are all new. The look and feel is clean, it's fresh, it's really new. But the functionality of, say, order entry or inventory, shop floor control, pretty much the same. One thing to be aware of is that Macola ES is a SQL-only maintenance upgrade. And what that means is to get to Macola ES, Exact considers it a part of your standard maintenance plan, which means they're not going to charge you a big bunch for the software to get there. But you do have to be on a certain version of progression, and you absolutely have to be on SQL, which I kind of thought at this juncture, most of our clients, the vast majority of progression users are already on SQL, but surprisingly enough, I was working with one of our progression clients the other day and realized that not only were they not on SQL, they were on B trees, so they hadn't even gotten to pervasive. So it definitely is still out there, and it's well worth mentioning that you must upgrade to Microsoft SQL and Progression SQL before we go to Macola ES. So what's new about ES? What will Macola ES do? As you can imagine, since they took out the accounting of progression and put in the accounting of globe, there are major accounting changes in Macola ES. The accounting modules are almost completely different. There are some familiar areas. Putting in an AP voucher looks pretty much the same. Selecting, well, it's a order entry. Doing recurring invoices and accounts receivable, pretty much the same. But other than that, it is completely new. And that, when we get to how we get you to ES and what takes a lot of time, you can expect that your accounting users will have to be completely retrained for Macola ES accounting. Very little of the knowledge that they had about how progression works in accounting and what it does can be transferred to ES. On the upside, Macola ES retains all of your GL transactions year after year. For those of you who are familiar with Macola's progression accounting and how that functions for year-end, progression year-end requires that you do a temporary year-end close, and before your final year-end close, it consolidates all of your prior year transactions, makes them into what are called comparatives, and deletes them. So for all of your prior year in the general ledger, you only have comparatives. You do not have the transactions in progression. Macola ES changes that. So year after year, although you do a year-end closing, it does not get rid of your prior year general ledger financial transactions. They stay there. You get immediate transaction postings to the GL, so no more of the interfacing from the subsidiary ledgers to the general ledger. Once invoices are posted, once vouchers are posted, those transactions hit the GL immediately. The cash flow processing in Macola ES, although, again, this is another area where users who are familiar with progression's way of doing things tend to struggle a little bit up front in the cash management, in recording incoming payments, cash receipts, outgoing payments, the AP checks process. Ultimately, they love it. I mean, the cash flow management is much improved in Macola ES. For those of you who have seen Macola ES, I think you'll agree that the screen design is a tremendous improvement. They have taken kind of a holistic look at how the menus were set up in progression and thought, we can do a better job than this. We can take some of those things that tend to gum up a menu or a screen, and we can consolidate them. A lot of processes that happen maybe monthly, maybe annually in each module have been taken out of those modules and put into a system tab, so they just don't crowd up the individual functional module menus. You'll see the same thing on a kind of screen by screen. For example, in inventory management in progression, in order to properly enter a completely new item, you had to go to the item master, you had to go to the item location, maybe you had to go to the vendor item file, maybe you had to go to the customer item. So you had to go to a lot of different places to make sure that you correctly populated all of the tables that were required for that new item. All of those are consolidated now in the item master file. So you go into the item master file, you enter your item, and you have push buttons that can take you to those various places. And you will also see a very tight very tight integration with Excel. There is a report option called the Excel add-in that allows Excel to access and report on any table in Macola ES. There are pre-designed reports for financial statements and such in the Excel add-in, and there's the option to create your own report. Now, what ES won't do. And these are the things that, are available in all of the documents about what the limitations are, but we find that these are things that come as most of a surprise to users. In progression, you could define a customer or a vendor as a miscellaneous customer or a miscellaneous vendor. The miscellaneous customer being a star 99999 number, same with the vendor. And the purpose of that was to allow you to do one-off sales or buys from customers and vendors that you didn't typically do business with. Those are no longer allowed in ES. So you have to have a specific vendor and a specific customer for purchases for sales. There are some significant limitations on what Progression Screen Designer can do, as well as what Flex can do. Now, the reason for that is the accounting modules that were replaced were replaced with Globe and with Globe screens. So the old Progression Designer will still work on those screens that that were inherited from Progression. So they said pretty much anything south of accounting is Progression, north in accounting, Macola ES/Globe. So we see that making changes, for example, to the customer master, no longer available with Designer. Same with the vendor master. So you have to be aware that if you have heavily modified screen sets using Designer, that could be an issue. It's something that we really want to investigate with you. Multi-company financial consolidation, again, the standard function in Progression, the ability to take the financials from two separate Progression companies and consolidate them into a third company. That is no longer available. However, it is very easy to create multi-company financial statements using the Excel add-in. So although the function to consolidate two different Progression companies into a third real company is no longer there, the ability to create the consolidated financial statements for two different Macola ES companies can be handled by the Excel add-in. For those of you, and you're few and far between, but every once in a while we find you, who are still using WebQueues and web orders, the old e-commerce solution from Progression way back when, that's no longer supported. And the replacement for that is the Assimilate or the Sniperdyne e-commerce solution. You will be, happy to know that there are no more, really, there are no vendor accumulators that come over from Progression. Now, the other accumulators that you're used to seeing, maybe in order entry, in inventory, they still come over. But frankly, because ES now is such a transaction-specific system, there's really no need for them. Now, we just converted a site in Michigan that ended up having quite a few reports that they had written based on accumulators. And they were panicked. What are we going to do? Because we don't have this information anymore. All of our reports run off of our accumulators. So once we kind of tossed them down from the ledge of it's no problem, because everything that's in an accumulator really is backed up by a specific transaction, and so we just really need to rewrite the report and point it to the appropriate transaction file. Once we did that, they actually kind of realized that the accumulators, more often than not, would give them erroneous information because the accumulators weren't cleared exactly when they needed to be. And for those of you who know about how the accumulators work, they're just buckets. And when you say my sales history period, for example, is over, close the accumulator, that's it. That's the end of it. So if you go back and you have to enter, orders to the prior period for corrective purposes, your accumulators are whacked. The accumulators have, a finite, they have a lid. Once you put the lid on that bucket, you can't do any more in that bucket. You got to do it in the next bucket. So I don't see that as a huge issue, but you do have to be aware of it. The concurrent user issue is not what Macola won't do in this case, really. It's kind of that Macola is licensed differently than Progression was. So in Progression, your user count is based on concurrent licensing, which means if you have a user license in Progression for 10 users, Progression really doesn't care who those users are. It just says that when you get to 10 folks logged in to Progression, you're done. You can't have any more. Somebody's got to log out and somebody else can take their place. Concurrent licensing. ES is named user licensing, which means you need to have a license for ES for every individual who will be using the system. And when you logged in to Progression, used to be, you had to set up a Progression user. In ES, the user is based on the network login. So there's no defining specific users per se in Macola ES. The user is defined by the network login. Where do you need to be in terms of hardware and everything to consider upgrading? And again, these are some of the minimums. These are some of the latest requirements coming out of Exact. You do have to have at least SQL Server 2005. They do support 2008 and 2012. The Progression version that you need to be on is 7.7.5. Now, in that particular instance, as a part of the upgrade process, if it doesn't make sense for you to go to 7.7.5, and do business on 7.7.5 in Progression, then what we do is we take the version of Progression you have, and we'll talk about this in a minute, how we proceed. We set up a test environment, and we just upgrade your test version to 7.7.5 and go from there. If you're using Crystal, it has to be the SAP Crystal 2011. I will tell you that there's a lot of talk in the Exact community and the reseller community about what the heck is going on with Macola and Crystal. They've settled on 2011, although I think that there's a couple others. There's 2010 out there. There's 2008, all supported on different versions of the software. So that conversation is not finished. But right now, their official stance is that in order to upgrade to ES, it will require Crystal 2011. You also have to have Microsoft Office 2003, 2007, or 2010. Now, on the server, again, they support Windows 2003, Windows 2008, and the 2008 R2 is supported as well. So 32 and 64-bit of 2008 are supported. And on the workstations, XP, Vista, or 7. And before anybody asks, 8 is not supported yet. There's some documents out there for the hardware requirements, which I mentioned earlier. You really do need to review the server and workstation hardware requirements to see how it compares to what you're using now. And there's the document number, and we would be happy. I mean, you can jot that down and get it from the exact portal, or we would be happy to send it to you. That's their hardware and software support document. So it explains in detail all about the versions that you see here, what happens with terminal server, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives a lot more detail than this. These are pretty much the basics of what you need to expect to be supported with ES. Okay, does anybody have any questions at this point? It's okay if you don't. All right. So what you see in front of you now are the methods for converting progression data to Macola ES. There are three options. That fourth down there, we'll talk about what that means. But there really are three options for getting your data from progression to ES. You have a master file conversion, which just takes over the master files in progression, customers, vendors, item, product structures, and we'll go in the next couple screens. I have some detail on exactly what comes over and exactly what doesn't come over, but that's pretty much what that means. You're just going to get the big files over. You're not going to get transactions or orders or anything. Your second option is a master file with distribution and manufacturing history. Again, same kind of master files, big guys coming over, but this time you also get your inventory, order entry, production, shop floor control history. Or you can do a full conversion. Full conversion brings over everything. You got the master files, you got the transactions, you have open orders, everything comes over. There's an additional step to each of these if you're using Synergy right now. If you're using Synergy with progression, what you really have today are two different databases. You have the progression database and you have the Synergy database. When we take your progression data to Macola ES, you will still have two databases. You'll have the Macola database and you'll have the Synergy database. But those two really match. So what we then have to do is what's called a DB merge, and we'll talk just a little bit about that in a minute or so. So here, master file conversion. Again, remember, these are the big files coming over. So what you see that will convert are your chart of accounts, all of your setup files for all the modules that you have installed, the maintenance files for all packages. Just means, you know, if you bring over your items, it's also going to bring over item locations and locations. So it just doesn't spell out each of those supporting master files. Customers, vendors, item master, item location, your bill of material, and your product structures. That's what converts. Now, it's important to understand what doesn't convert and the implications of that for your project. You get no transactions for GL balances. You get no history, and you get no open orders. Now, for your history, that's fine. That can stay in progression if you'd like, and you can close down progression and you can reference your history as needed. I mean, we can write reports or views back to the progression history that you feel you may need to reference. But you do have to consider, if you're not bringing over transactions and GL balances and you're not bringing over open orders, they have to be entered. Master file conversion with distribution history. You'll notice the same kind of what converts. Now, on this one, the history from distribution and manufacturing will come over with it. But as with the master file conversion, the GL balances and financial transactions and the open orders do not convert and have to be somehow, I say manually, but somehow input into the database. Full conversion, this is it. Well, now I'd say everything converts. Everything kind of sort of converts. So you get all the data from the master files. You get all your historical data. You get all your transactions. You get all your open orders. So there's no entering any of that stuff. There's no worrying about your GL balances, your beginning balances and such. That is converted. But what doesn't necessarily convert is user-defined data. Sometimes we find that it converts, sometimes we find that it doesn't. So it depends on where it is and what it's doing and how it got there. Fixed assets, your assets and depreciation, there is an asset upload tool, and it currently is part of the conversion process. It is unfortunately an unreliable part of the conversion process still. We have converted one of our larger sites in Kansas City recently, and they had the assets and depreciation, and we converted it, and we are still struggling today. This was last December. We are still struggling today to get the proper depreciation calculated in ES. So I put that on the list of that doesn't convert because it really is going to be kind of a case-by-case basis. Now, with either method, or any of the three methods that you saw before, if you are using Synergy, this is kind of a graphical interpretation of what needs to happen, because as you see, the DB merge is that process that allows you to put a Macola ES database, which we converted from Progression, to a Synergy database. So as I said, those two databases are the same, well, very similar tables. Synergy has a few extra tables, but for the most part, they're one-to-one match. So once we get your progression data via the ES upgrade into the Macola ES format, we then take the eSynergy data that's out there and run the DB merge on it to make one database. And what that merge does, as you can see, it looks at customers, it looks at vendors, items, documents, requests, and projects, and it merges those together. Now, regardless of the option that you choose or which way we go, these are some kind of hard and fast rules. If you have COBOL mods, you can forget them. They're not going to convert. They're not going to be rewritten. If you have flex mods, they may or may not work. They may or may not have to be rewritten. And that's really a part of our testing process, which we do very thoroughly. So, I think I would say that my recollection for our projects that have had lots of flex is typically, I don't know, 70-30, 60-40 as to what works and what we have to modify. And of the 40% that we have to modify, lots of modifications are minor, but there have been a couple where we've had to completely rewrite and rethink a flex app. Crystal reports, as I said, may or may not have to be rewritten. Lots of new tables in ES because we have new accounting. So the accounting tables are completely different than Progression. The inventory, the order entry, again, the land south of accounting, lots are the same. But regardless of that, we do take and require you to take a pretty good look at your Crystal reports and see which ones, first of all, which ones you need. Do you still use them? And secondly, we test those pretty thoroughly as well. You have custom forms that you use, checks, purchase orders, order acknowledgments, invoices. Those have to be, again, this may or may not have to be redone. If you're using F9, one of the considerations is, do you continue using F9 for ES, which will come into play in the whole cost element, because you're going to have to pay to upgrade the F9 software to work with ES? Or do we take your F9 statements and recreate them using the Excel add-in? And as you recall, I said the Excel add-in is the report writing tool built in to Macola ES with there are existing financial statement templates there, so we can build any report that we want out of the data in ES. So that's well worth looking at. And what external applications might you have that utilize progression data? That's something that sometimes we here at Algorithm have very little visibility of. So it could be that you've maybe built reports, or you have access, or there's some application out there that you tied to progression somehow. So we want to be aware in our due diligence of what we are going to be impacting when we turn progression into Macola ES. All right, what's our methodology? We have done quite a few of these upgrades from ES. We've done them for years. I'll tell you that we've learned our lessons in the way in which we approach them, and we learned some pretty hard lessons, and we're able to ultimately put together a roadmap that pretty much guaranteed success if we all follow it. What you see in front of you is the roadmap. The first three steps really embody one of our philosophies, and that is testing. We do nothing on your production system without thoroughly testing it before, ever. Regardless of what we're doing, if it's an ES upgrade or a progression update. We don't do anything on a live environment. We work in a test environment first. So in our ES upgrade, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a test environment, a full test environment that is compliant with ES hardware requirements and software requirements. We can help you do that, or we can just give you here's a test environment you need to set up. Let us know when it's set up. We install all the software, Macola ES, Crystal, oftentimes even a test installation of progression to that test environment. So once we have that set up, our first order of business, which may sound a little bit odd, a little bit out of order, but our first order of business is to address data. We make sure the data is cleaned up, and we run test conversions using the exact conversion utility, and very typically a slew of SQL scripts. Lots of times we find that the progression data, because it is very different than Macola ES data, it needs to be cleaned up. And lots of times there are no particular tools that progression provides to clean up the things that need to be cleaned up. So we have developed over the years, as I said, a library of SQL scripts for very typical problems that we see in the progression data. And so we start to kind of build your data process, your data cleanup process, so that we can get the progression data in the shape that it needs to be to ensure a clean conversion. Now, those test conversions, that may be 2 or 3 times that we convert this data until we think that it is as flawless a conversion as we can get to. Only after that, or as we are approaching what we think is the final test conversion, the flawless conversion, do we start the application training for the project team. That was one lesson that we learned pretty early on, as a matter of fact, that we started the application training way too early on in the process and found out that we had a bunch of issues with the data. So we had all these users trained, and then it took us like 3 months to get through fixing all of the data. Well, by the time we fixed all the data, the users forgot what we trained them in, and so we had to train them again. So that's why we address your data issues first. And we wait till we have some good, clean data for use in our training and then for your users to test. Normally, our normal approach, again, in any implementation, is we work with a project team. We do not work with end users. Now, if you have 5 users, we'll break that rule. If you have 50 users, we're going to want to work with a project team. We're going to want representatives from each functional area to work as the project team. Those are the people that we're going to train. Those are the people whom we will expect to then hand off and do the testing of this data. The pilot test plan, the next phase is the actual application and data testing. And this is the absolute most crucial part of a successful project. And it is the phase of a project that when it is not well executed by your team, I guarantee you, will cost you at least 30 to 50% more total than it would have if your team had done the proper testing. It's so easy to skip steps here. What we do after we complete the training is we work with you, we work with your team to develop a test plan. And we have a template for that, and I'll show you a bit of it later. And it is extremely detailed and very thorough. We have listed out every function in Macola ES by module. And so we work with your team to say, okay, in accounts payable, these are the things that need to be tested. Vendor masters, adding a new vendor master, testing converted data, putting in vouchers, putting in cancellation vouchers, putting in credit memos, putting in manual checks, putting in, doing the payment process, backing the payment process out. So everything is covered. And with you, we decide, yes, that is a part of your daily process. You do that. Now, for example, in AP, there's a thing called authorized vouchers. Maybe you don't use them. Okay, we cross them off the list. What we pilot and what we implement in ES will reflect only those processes that you use in Progression today. Now, that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It just means that it makes for a cleaner, more efficient implementation project. We don't introduce anything new and outrageous to your process. We stick with what you know, and we make sure that you know it well and it works in ES. So when we develop that plan has names on it as to who's responsible for the testing, and that's what we expect you to do. We then expect you to test the system according to the agreed-upon plan. And so as you're testing the system, though, we make sure that we're available. Typically, it's, 1 day a week, if it's a big project, that we come back and work through any issues that you have. So once we successfully pilot the system, we agree that everything works as it's supposed to. Our next step is user training. And again, this could be redundant based on the size of your organization, if you do have a project team or it's just the users who are involved in the implementation. But at this point, if you do have a large team, a large constituency, user training comes next. Now, it would be our expectation that at this point, your project team knows enough about the software that they can do the training themselves. And part of the piloting is the development of process manuals. So I know that there are help menus and help manuals and exact software manuals, but that's not that does you no good on a day-to-day basis for your processes. So what we want you to do, and we will help you do it, is to develop your own, client-specific, function-specific user manuals. So, for example, at Pennsylvania Railcar, you will have the Pennsylvania Railcar order entry manual. This is how we enter an order. This is what the fields mean to us. This is what we should do in each of the fields. So we can do screenshots, throw them in Word, step by step by step. Once we have those done, user training should be a no-brainer. It's a breeze because we already have defined how we do things, and we've tested it, and they work. Now, once our users are trained, we then plan for the cutover and go live. And at this juncture, both of those should be almost a complete non-event. Because if we do a full conversion, a full data conversion of progression to ES can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be a month end or a quarter end. We're not waiting on anything in progression to finish. We don't have to. We're bringing over all the data. So if we do a full conversion, we could do it on a Wednesday and come in on Thursday. Now, if we do master file conversions, we have to be cognizant of the fact that although we still don't really have month-end or quarter-end issues, we do have to be aware that there's some data entry that needs to be done in addition to the conversion. That's going to consume some time, and so we have to plan for that. Go live is, it should be a non-event. I will tell you it rarely is. People kind of freak out. They forget what they learned, or, as is often the case, they forgot to tell us that there was a report that they used that's really critical, and so it never made it to the list, and so it's never tested. So it's never piloted, it was never addressed, and they run that report. It's guaranteed they run the report first thing Monday morning. So those, you kind of expect those things, and we're there to help mitigate those and fix them. Then after that, what we find to be the most effective next step is a 30-day follow-up. And we focus that follow-up really on two things, kind of a debriefing. How did it go? What issues have you seen that we didn't expect? How could we have done this better? What do we need to plan for your next phase? We implemented only those things that you did in progression, but there's some really cool things now you can do in ES. Is it time to implement those? And then we also do what we call advanced accounting training. And the advanced accounting training curriculum was developed based on a review and analysis of the types of support calls that we got from our ES customers after conversion. So the things that were most confusing, the things that were most troublesome, we put together in a curriculum to address those things. Things like voiding an AP check, or how to correctly use a customer card or a vendor card or a GL card. And cards are a new function, a new display function in Macola ES that can be kind of confusing. So we find that having a class to address all those things has been very helpful. Okay, any questions yet? I guess I'm looking at the clock. I should probably speed it up. All right, what are the key factors to success? Actually, two on here are really, really key, and the others are just, you should probably really think about these. The first and the last one, absolutely, without a doubt, the most critical part of the ES upgrade. Cleaning your progression data and keeping it clean. So we'll talk a little bit about, in a minute, what that means, what the real key areas are. But Macola ES database is very different, much more structured than the progression database was. So the things that you could do with the progression database, you can't do in ES, and we can't convert it until it's compliant with the ES database. Remapping your chart of accounts. That's actually a significant difference between progression and Macola ES. The progression chart of accounts was one long field that you could mask to look like 3 different fields. So if your account number looks like it's 3 fields in progression, that's just a mask. It's really not. It's one number. When it goes to ES, it actually becomes 3 numbers. It becomes a main account number. It becomes a cost unit, which in progression terminology is a profit center. It becomes a cost center, in progression terminology, a department. So you can, there is a utility that will take that chart of accounts from progression, tear it down, and create those new segments. It creates a main segment and puts it in one table. It creates a second segment and puts it in another table. It creates a third segment, puts it in a third table. Now, at that point, you actually can change your chart of accounts. You can remap things. You can remove accounts. You can add accounts. You can do accounting a whole different way. If you are of a mind to do that, then we think you need to think it over. You think it through very thoroughly. We almost have to map it out in Excel and make sure that it works with pulling down transactions, mapping them, and putting those transactions where they should go, because it is a seemingly straightforward mapping process, but it is actually very, very tricky because of the way that ES now handles the chart of accounts and the relationships between all 3 of those segments. Next is minimizing Crystal reports. And I say this, Crystal is a great tool. It is a great tool. It is overused in many cases. You'll find that if you use a lot of Crystal reports, you probably have maybe 20%, 30% of those reports are ones that you use on a day-to-day basis, the ones that you really fall back on. You'll find that you have a lot of reports out there that you don't really use anymore, or that you have a lot of reports that really can be consolidated into a single report based on some selection criteria added. So that's just kind of a word for the wise, that, rewriting Crystal reports is a lot of daggone overhead in a project like this. And last but not least, really, this should be the first on the list, is do your part. I know that everybody's busy. Everybody has a job that takes them 9, 10, 11 hours a day. But when you engage us and yourself in this project, and you commit to testing the data, you commit to working with us, you commit to your part of this project, and you do not do it, or you don't do it thoroughly, it will, without fail, cause problems after you're in ES, and it will cost you more money. So the testing part and the data conversion and the cleaning up the data are the most significant aspects of an ES upgrade. It's really not, I will tell you, it's really not software itself. It's getting progression clean and testing. Now, specifically of the data cleanup that you have to be aware of in progression, we have a checklist that covers all of this. So, it's what we'll hand to you before we start, and really you kind of got to keep it pinned to your wall, because the data has to be kept clean. So it could be for you an iterative process to keep this data in proper shape. One of the most important, crucial, critical things that have to happen, your subsidiary ledgers must reconcile to the penny with your general ledger account. with no correcting journal entry to fix awkward balances. What that means is if there's an entry in your AP open item, it must match to the GL. If there is an entry to your general ledger AP account, it must be supported by an open item in accounts payable. So that's one of the biggest headaches that we've had, because progression doesn't matter in progression. I could book a journal entry all day long to accounts payable or accounts receivable with no supporting documentation in my subsidiary ledger. You cannot do that in ES. Even in ES, if you try to put a journal entry in, which you can do, you can put a journal entry in to accounts payable, but you are required in that journal entry to assign it to a vendor. Your file validations all have to pass. In progression, in the System Manager module, I believe under the Process menu, could be wrong about that, but I think it's under the Process menu, is a little thing called File Validations, and it is a system check that progression does against the integrity of a lot of your files, the item master file, the customer files, open item files, bill of material files. It makes sure that, as I said, the integrity of the file is good. Things that can happen, for example, you have items out there with a location, and then somehow you decide you don't want the location anymore, you delete the location. Well, the item's still sitting out there with that location. You're able to delete the location, but you have a record out there that references it. You have to fix that. So this file validation will give you a report of all of those types of anomalies that have to be fixed. So until all of those file validation reports come back with everything's in order, we have data fixing to do. And I will say that's where we have a ton of SQL scripts to fix those kinds of issues. You got to review your GL account numbers and your cash accounts. I say review the GL account numbers because in progression, you could throw numbers into that middle segment and that third segment without really defining what they were. Macola ES wants to know if they're a cost center or a cost unit. So they have to be real segments. So you just want to eyeball that. You want to be aware that your progression people that really aren't people, salespeople, buyers, planners, collectors in Macola ES need to be real people. So those types of records will be required to have an ES named license. Not a named license, but they will look for a person. So they have to be assigned to a person. Country codes, this is a biggie. In the customer file, alternate address files, vendor files, alternate address files. The country code field in progression is practically a user-defined field. In ES, it is the 2-character international country code. That's a huge one we have to fix, a big one. We fix that one in every conversion that we've done. We've had to fix those. Terms codes, in progression, you have an AP terms code, you have an AR terms code. ES, you have a shared. They share the file. So if you have old terms codes out there that you don't use anymore in progression, get rid of them. It makes that merging of those two files much easier. And again, ES does not support miscellaneous vendors or customers. So if you've got them, before we convert, you've got to clean them up. You've got to get rid of every open item for them. They will not convert, nor will the open items. Here's our success factor piloting. I said this is the do your part. This is just a screenshot of the template that we use to develop your pilot plan, your Macola ES pilot plan. And as you can see across the bottom, we've got tabs there for each of the modules, and it goes on quite a ways. And on the tab that we're on right now is the order entry tab. So the tasks on that column define everything that can happen in order entry. So we will go through, and if you put in regular orders, yes, we do that. Do you ever copy them from history? No, we don't. We'll delete that. Do you take deposits with your orders? No, we don't. We'll delete that. Master orders? Oh, yeah, we do that. So we'll put that in. Under resource, who on your team is going to be responsible for testing this? And then that's as far as we go. Then we hand it out to you, and that person who's responsible is the one who then fills out pass-fail. Did this process pass or did it fail? Did we verify if there are any general ledger distributions? Did we verify those? What issues did we report? Do we need additional training? And there's a link for the procedures document. So as I said, it is excruciatingly detailed. But we help, I mean, it's a good tool, and it will be a very good tool for piloting for you. All right, what's the cost of this? How much is it going to cost you? So, of course, the caveat is each upgrade is different. That I have to say, doing an estimate for a customer who's interested in an ES upgrade is like my biggest headache. It was really hard to do because the databases are different. What people are using is different, but this is pretty much these are the elements that are involved. Any potential updates to your hardware or to your operating system. Any software upgrades that you have to do. Maybe you have to upgrade SQL. Maybe you have to upgrade Crystal. There's some minor costs in ES. It's a maintenance difference. Well, then there's F9. The support contract algorithm requires a support contract for the first year. So you have to maintain a support contract with us for the first year of ES. And then if you decide to renew, great. If not, how about it? But we do need that first-year support contract. And these are just the average, very, very average hours for each of the methods. The full transactional, the master file, and the DB merge. By far, the full transactional is the most popular option. Most customers choose full transaction. They don't do master file. Okay, a couple case studies. We'll run through these very quickly. I know we're running late. I'm really sorry. We'll run through these pretty quickly, and then if you have any questions. So case study number one. It was a 5-user installation. They did use shop floor control, and they had one company, no synergy. So it cost them $3,600 in software, $3,300 in annual support, and it took us 95 hours to get theirs done. Now, services, remember, includes all of the data cleanup, the training, the assistance with the pilot, the go-live, so the after-go-live support, that's included there. The second one we looked at is a very large company, large distribution company, 60 users, 3 or 4 different companies, and multiple databases, lots of external applications. They were using Synergy, so we had to merge it. I will say in this particular case, this company had in-house IT. They had an amazing IT group. So their software cost was only $16. They had to upgrade F9, they had to upgrade Crystal, 5700. There was a couple other things in there they had to do. Their annual support is $6,900. So you'll notice their ES services was 225 hours. And their database merge and Synergy, 60 hours. So it took quite a long time. And then last but not least, we have a small, light manufacturing. Again, single database, no Synergy, but they did have an IT expert in-house. And $155 for software, $500 for a Crystal upgrade, $2,500 for support, and it only took us 45 hours. So it does really run the gamut, I will tell you.